Good. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. Very much appreciate your attendance. And I think it's fair to say you're in for a treat this morning. We have got a fantastic panel of speakers lined up for you today as we unpack the mystery and the impact of AI on the private equity industry and beyond, of course. Before we get started with today's panel, couple of quick housekeeping points for you. If you haven't managed to locate them, the toilets are out that door and then turn right. If there is a fire bell that rings, it's real. So run down the stairs as quickly as possible. But no, yeah, the exit points are signposted up there. There's a muster point out the front of the building. In terms of questions for today, we'll be taking questions towards the end of this panel, but we also have some remarkably exciting and advanced technology which can be accessed via the QR code there, which is Slido. So if you have a question that comes up during the conversations, please do put that down on the Slido tool. The QR code also is handily on the back of your name badge. So please do scan that, add your questions, or save them for the end, and we'll be roving the mic around, and we can do questions that way. So that's that bit out of the way. Let's get this show on the road, and let's start with some simple and brief introductions from everybody. So today, I am your host. I am James Preble. I am the CEO and co-founder of Palladium. You don't need to know any more about that. You must know us, otherwise you wouldn't be here. I'm joined today by Rich Klee. Rich heads up Palladium's AI practice, specifically our AI solution, Prism, which we can come into in a little bit more detail later. I'm joined by Nicola from Apeiris. I'm going to give the stage over to you guys to tell a little bit more about your business shortly. I'm joined by Helen, Chief Product Officer for multiple FTSE 100 companies. And I'm also joined today by Jonathan Peachy, COO of Next 15 and leading the M&A strategies of Next 15 as well. But before we dive into today's questions and the weird feedback I get when I turn left versus right, so I'll turn myself slightly. Nicola, you have the mic. Just a very, very brief overview of who Apeiris are and what they do.
Thanks, James. So I'm Nicola Gray. I'm an investment partner at Apeiris, which is a mid-market private equity firm based here in the UK. I'm responsible for deal origination, execution, particularly within healthcare. I sit on our investment committee and also on the portfolio company boards of two of our businesses. As I said, Apeiris is a mid-market firm. So to put that in context, some of the experiences I'll be sharing today, that's kind of businesses valued up to about 500 million. They're across all sectors of the economy and are typically international in reach. We tend to buy businesses that have some element of complexity, but where we see huge transformation potential, and that is often around technology. And we'll be obviously talking today about AI and where we see the benefit of that in the portfolio.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nicola. And JP, if you could give us a quick overview of Next 15.
Right. So, yeah, Next 15 is the building that you're in is Next 15. We're a growth consultancy. We think of ourselves as an organization of 22 specialist businesses that focus on helping our clients grow themselves in a variety of different ways. So we have organizations in the group that specialize in better insight for making better decisions. We have organizations that help with marketing and positioning challenges that our clients face. We have a big part of our business that focuses on generating direct revenue for our clients, and that's very fast growing. And then we have what we call business transformation, which is the part of the group that Palladium fits into, where we are helping our clients think through the major challenges, the inflection points that they face, and build entirely new strategies, and in some cases businesses. So alongside Palladium, we have a business called Transform, which helps predominantly public sector organizations deal with complex data and tech challenges. And we have another business called Mac 49, which builds billion-dollar scale businesses for people like Mitsubishi and TDK, Hitachi. We're a highly acquisitive group, so we've grown very quickly through growing the portfolio companies that we have, but also through acquisition. So it's a really interesting debate today to talk about what how AI plays into that.
Thank you, Jonathan. Okay, well, you're not here to hear from me. You're here to hear from the panel and their experiences with AI to this point. So I think let's start to build the hype a little bit. I think, I don't think there's any doubt that there is a lot of buzz still around AI. Are we out of the hype cycle? Are we still in the hype cycle? Is it all hype, or indeed is it here to stay? And interestingly, AI as a principle has been with us for a very, very long time, but the introduction of tools like ChatGPT has, I guess, thrust that into kind of the everyday thinking of us as investors, as business owners, and operators of those businesses. And what we're really interested in, I guess, to start with, and some of the questions to the panel is very much around what their initial thoughts were as this tidal wave of optimism, skepticism, buzz, hype, opportunity made its way to our doors with the arrival of ChatGPT and all of the information that went with that. And now you can't go on to you can't go to a presentation, you can't go on LinkedIn, you can't open a newspaper or a magazine without seeing some sort of reference to the impact that AI is having. So much so that I don't know if anyone saw this week, the interview with Barack Obama and the think tank that he's part of, where they liken the democratization of AI to that of electricity. Such will be the impact on our lives. So I'm not going to ask you to tell me whether or not it's going to have the impact of electricity, but what I do want to know is, for all of you that have had some kind of exposure to the technology to this point and are looking at it either from an investment perspective or from an operational perspective, what were your initial thoughts on where the opportunities lie with AI, and how is that starting to evolve as you spend more time looking at it and with businesses that are adopting it? And you know what, I think we'll put you on the spot, Jonathan, and let you kick off there, get your initial reaction.
So I've always been a bit of a techno optimist. So I have been tracking AI for a long time. So I suppose my personal reaction was one of excitement and at the possibilities. Helen is one of our non-exec board members at Next 15, and we had a really interesting session recently where we sat around the board table and talked about exactly this question: how we all felt about the impact of AI and whether it was overhyped or was the real deal, and also how far away were the impacts of it. And I think where we netted out was probably that everybody had come to the place where this is absolutely going to be transformational, and there are questions about timescales, and the timescales are probably different in different parts of our business and in fact in different parts of everybody's businesses. But you cannot overlook this in the way that possibly things like blockchain and virtual reality perhaps were overhyped and won't come through in the way that AI obviously will. And we're seeing that across our businesses as well. I think everyone's been through the grief cycle of denial and anger, and everybody is now in the acceptance stage and is really embracing the potential of AI for their businesses.
And Helen, how's that looking inside kind of the larger, more complex kind of FTSE 100 businesses that you work within? What's been the reaction there?
So you've said it, Jimmy, and I want to echo it. Anybody who booked an Uber to get here did or did not like what Netflix recommended to them. It's an obvious thing to say, but it's important. AI is already pervasive in our conduct as individuals and as businesses. So if I reflect on the adoption of this capability in the businesses I've worked in, I think there has always been an underlying hunger to unleash the capability to drive efficiency on the cost line. Because fundamentally, algorithmic decisioning doesn't get hungry and bored, and it is much better at handling high complexity decisioning where there is conflict of potential outcome. That is what this capability is genius at. What I find exciting, in the same way that JP does, is I think generative AI, which has exposed the way the technology works to the consumer, has ignited a flame of curiosity, which is useful in the pursuit of driving further adoption of more basic prosaic AI, if you like, in business operations. It's helped make something that's perhaps difficult to get a handle on as a non-specialist or as a non-technologist accessible to a business leader. And so for me, I don't think this is a new thing. I think this is the latest advancement in a long-standing field of learning and capability build. And I'm excited to harness the wave of enthusiasm that these latest breakthroughs are driving in management teams.
Fantastic. Nicola, if I could come to you then, with the added complexity of having multiple portfolio companies, I'm sure clamoring to start to look at this and take advantage. What was the initial reaction at Pyrus, certainly from an investment board level, the perspective of opportunity or fear? What was the kind of the initial reaction there?
So from Pyrus, in terms of the technology, I think it's definitely kind of embracing that change. If you think about, and as Helen said, it's not a thing that's happened overnight. Whilst we've read about it more, since ChatGPT arrived and in the newspapers, the ability to use data, machine learning, to gain insights quickly and drive deeper insights is something that we've been, trying to harness, for a long time. And this allows us to do that more quickly and to, do that at every level of the organization. So we, as I say, sort of harnessing the technology, starting to implement it within our own investment processes. And we'll talk a little bit more, I'm sure, later about what that means. I think in terms of the point around adoption, and as you said, sort of we're all using it anyway, but as we sort of bring it more to the forefront, we've really been thinking about it sort of augmenting our processes as opposed to automation. And I think that is quite important as we talking about our workforces and the people in our businesses, the sort of tools to make us have better decisions faster, but working with the technology. We're not seeing it as a route of complete automation. It's working with a human in the loop, or definitely with that oversight. The sort of 10-year view maybe a bit different, but certainly for now, that's how we're positioning it within our business, and therefore we're seeing sort of real excitement by the teams in the portfolio companies and also in the investment sort of business to see what we can do.
Fantastic, thank you, Nicola. And then moving on finally to you there, Rich. I guess probably having had exposure to 30, 40 portcos in the last 6 months, all asking you questions around what can I do with this and where could this go for me? Are there any kind of common themes that are emerging from those conversations you've had with portfolio companies and with funds around their ambitions for AI, or certainly their fears?
Yeah, and I think you've touched on a good point there. There are both threats and opportunities to a business from this latest step change in AI capability. Might just be worth putting a pin in the map and understanding where we are in that timeline from now to Terminator. And Helen made a good point that narrow AI, as we've called it, demand forecasting, has been around for decades. We are now at the generative AI stage, where we can have a single model that is able to do more than one thing at a reasonably competent level and can respond in human-like ways, which then makes it easier to integrate with our processes. Where we're going, and you can think of it as we're in the middle of the process now, where we're moving to is AGI, or artificial general intelligence. The median estimate for that at the moment is 2040, but who knows? Maybe Sam Altman knew something we didn't and caused the boardroom fracas. But at the moment, yeah, we think around about 2040, maybe we get to a point where we have an intelligence that can operate as an expert in multiple domains, but we're not there yet. So coming back to your question, what can we do in this, let's call it the middle age of AI before we get to super intelligence? And the opportunities will depend very much on the particular business. Where there is a consumer facing side to the business, then the human-like responses that generative AI can give are typically being used as chatbots. So the CEO of Octopus just came out recently and said that they have hugely increased the efficiency of their call centers by triaging inbound customer calls via an AI chatbot. And what's more so, the customers, when surveyed, are happier with the chatbot response than they are the human response. So they're incredibly bullish on it. And that's allowing them to reduce the size of their call centers, or in fact, increase throughput and customer satisfaction. So again, generative AI, very good at human-like responses, great for customer interactions. On the B2B side, it's then really around, and we call it the great, business process automation reawakening. And Helen, you mentioned it before. It's kind of like people forgot that you could automate processes before. And now with AI, they're going back and looking at all this previous work they've done around mapping processes and looking at what's possible with this new technology. And to give you an example of that, we're working with a firm that had a digital transformation piece ongoing. They identified a number of different use cases, and then they looked at which ones were realistic within their hold period. And it wasn't really until the last 6 months where they've now gone back, looked at that and said, actually, this stuff that wasn't possible in December of last year is now possible. And they're now reprioritizing their whole digital transformation piece because of what this new Gen AI capability gives them. And just to bring that to life, what that actually is it's a system that allows them to go out, harvest potential IP infringement instances from around the web, bring that back in, make a legal expert-based judgment on the confidence of upholding that infringement, and then sending that to a bunch of IP lawyers. And again, that technology just was simply not possible 6 months ago, but is now.
I think it's almost like we practice this, Rich, because that leads me very nicely into, I think, something that everybody is really interested in, which is use cases. We talk a lot about opportunities. We talk a lot about harnessing the power of it and seeing where it could take us, and certainly putting that private equity lens on it. Can I drive out some efficiency, and what's the multiple that I benefit from these installs, or how does that differentiate me? But for everybody, it's all quite conceptual. So let's move on from that and into some. I would really like to talk about. I think it's unanimous that the AI trajectory is only going to get kind of faster and kind of more adoption within businesses of all shapes and sizes. So I guess I'm going to throw the mic back to JP for a second and say, you have 23 businesses within the portfolio. What are some of the emerging use cases that they have started to identify and I guess reap benefit from, if you've seen any of those, or certainly take the steps towards starting to see some benefit from the adoption and implementation of AI solutions?
So I've got a couple of examples from inside, and then maybe one from outside as well. So we were talking to one of our law firm partners the other day about what happened with the Volkswagen emissions scandal, and what has happened with that is that in the class action suits that have followed that, the first 100 cases were prosecuted in court, and that was used to train a model. And now all of the other thousands of cases are now being settled through AI. So these things are not going through court, they're not going through lawyers, people are just getting settlements based on all the learning and the insight that was generated from the first 100 or so court cases. So that's, you can see what that does to efficiency and the way that class actions are conducted, and indeed probably makes it more likely that class actions will be brought in the future. It's mind-boggling, and it has, I think it has profound implications for the legal profession as well. We have one of our portfolio companies that specialise in helping their clients build entirely new businesses, and they have a very, very structured process for doing that. And it is clear in their experimentation, and a lot of the steps in their process can be wholly or partly done now with the assistance of AI. So, for example, going out and testing a new proposition, the classic way to do that might be to create an ad for that proposition, buy some ads online, see how many people click on those things to test demand. Well, you can get the model to create the ads, place the ads, monitor the feedback, continue varying the ads until you get to the optimal take up for that. And that process can happen completely automatically, much more quickly than in the old days where people were doing it. We do a lot of, as a group, we do a lot of pain point interviews, because obviously solving problems for our customers starts with working out what the real pain is. And actually, you can do quite a lot, we found, with synthetic personas, which allow you to work out where the target area for customer pain is, and then do a far smaller number of interviews at the end to work out what's going on. But typically we might do 400 or 500 interviews today to really get to the heart of customer pain, and that can be reduced to maybe 40 or 50. So there's some really solid use cases already about how this is going to change our world, and we're only just getting started here.
Thanks, JP. And Nicola, similar structure, of course, with portfolio of businesses. What for you, I mean, you have a really varied kind of portfolio, but for you, have any kind of common use cases outed from a portfolio perspective? We'll come on to the fund, after this, but from a portfolio perspective, what sort of opportunities are surfacing and starting to be realised?
Portfolio companies through industrials, consumer, healthcare, TMT services, so the full range of underlying sectors. Our approach has been therefore to look at horizontal use cases that we can apply to agnostic in terms of sector. And we've touched on some of them in terms of the chatbots for customer relations and customer queries. And I think that's one that's been pretty well established now in terms of the technology and the outcomes. That as ever, there's nuance that works really well with some customer groups and less well with others. So we have a business that is in telecare and that serves a more elderly and more vulnerable population, and they still have an aversion to some of the technology. If you have a triage system, that is a real switch off. So actually having a human interaction there is really important. So it's, I think, important, whilst recognizing the use case might work across, to then understand and really your customer and whether that is applicable and whether that drives value. The other one that we have spent quite a bit of time in from the sort of private equity lens into the portfolio is in bolt-on acquisitions. So a huge amount of our value creation within Epirus has been through M&A, through scaling businesses. And we have originally led a lot of that ourselves, manually sort of searching, and we have developed through AI a way to try and replicate the capabilities that we want within the portfolio companies, and allowed us to build a model to identify bolt-on acquisitions, and then all the way through to then targeting and the comms out. That is quite powerful when it's in the UK, where it's even more powerful is globally. So many of our businesses operate internationally, and being able to run a search across any language into any country globally for our organizations is just simply a capability that they wouldn't be able to have internally of their internal M&A team for sort of slightly smaller and mid-sized organizations. So we're finding that ability to translate language is a really key one for us, and then being able to sort of scale that pretty rapidly across any industry is a use case that we're finding sort of real value from. And we're again trying to find areas where there's a value creation upside that is not just productivity linked, but there's a sort of growth aspect as well. Because otherwise, all of it is, there's a lot of use cases around productivity, but really thinking about where is the step changes, where is the material gains is the area that we're focused on.
Thank you, Nicola. And a couple of origination teams now sitting there getting slightly hot under the collar as you press forward with developing your AI-based origination. But that's a lot. It's far too much positivity for this time in the morning. So let's get a little bit more negative, shall we? So Rich and Helen, you've got the pleasure of this. But given we've talked at the moment about here's AI and there's lots of possibilities and opportunities, and we're actually starting to identify some use cases. We're bringing this to life. There's been a lot of talk about efficiency. It's great. I want to talk a little bit more about unpacking some of the opportunity to create new revenue streams or create value elsewhere. But Helen, I guess, you work with very, very complex businesses. And Rich, you're on the sharp end of kind of executing on some of these solutions. For the audience's benefit, what are some of the complexities and challenges, perhaps barriers to adoption of these technologies that you've experienced to this point?
So Rich won't like this. In my experiences, these initiatives fail when they're conceptualized as technology plays. So one of the pieces of counsel I would offer to the room is to examine where the energy for the initiative is coming from in the organizations you're interacting with, because for sure this needs engineering chops. For sure, it needs legal counsel to ensure that the ethical standpoint on which you're sitting is sound, that you've thought through IP, you've thought through complex issues of ownership. But let's not crush the glorious idea before it's even been created. Where is the energy coming from that idea creation? So I would be looking for that. And to Nicola's point, I think it is very easy for these opportunities to become reductive incredibly quickly. I think part of that is us as humans. We are very good at reimagining what already exists. So the rewire for efficiency, we are not so strong at completely reimagining a different future. So in danger of becoming a little bit positive, I am completely convinced that Gen AI's ability to sense intent is what the game changer is going to be. Because if you think about how we've trained consumers, so that's my background, consumer, we've trained consumers that you search using this methodology, that you get recommendations using this methodology, that you seek support and advice in this way. This capability has the ability to do it in one. So to listen to my total problem set as a consumer and realize that for me. Now, you're not going to get to that through a let's rewire our business processes using brilliant capability. Yeah. So look, I work in technology. I love technologists, but if this is only a technology play, in my experience, it will fail because you need the business sponsorship to rethink what the business is, the roles, the accountabilities, the new way of showing up. And that has to come from within the business, not the technology, I think. Sorry, Rich. Disagree with me. Make this interesting.
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't. I mean, it's always about change management, stupid. And I won't name them, but just to pick on one of your points where you said it's great for translation. I got a request the other day for our own internal AI tool where someone asked, when's it going to have a translation facility? I said, well, I just assumed everyone would recognize that it can already do that. But there's a real education piece that I think is missing with a lot of these tools. With hype comes theatre, and with theatre comes the grift. Yeah, that there's grift when there's a small island in the Caribbean that owns the .ai domain name extension, basically doubling their country's revenues because of the number of people buying these and jumping on the bandwagon. And we need to recognize that, and we need to practice discernment when we're choosing tools. And when we have chosen a tool, we then really need to put the effort into education, because like any tool, and large language models are the absolute exemplar of this, like any tool, you will not get the benefit of it without a skilled craftsman using it. And there needs to be a lot of effort. And Nicola and I were only talking about this yesterday, in fact, in the unless you have a good grasp of how to work with these technologies and these large language models, how to do prompt engineering, you are never going to realize their full potential. And that requires training, it requires education. Without that, then quite frankly, people become disillusioned very quickly with the capabilities, because they're sold the hype that ChatGPT will replace your job. And in reality, no, it won't. Well, actually, it might do with the correct prompt engineering. But that, again, requires training, it requires knowledge. And in a large education, in a large organization, that's difficult, right? And those challenges don't go away with this, with AI. And in fact, the requirement and the importance on change management almost becomes doubly so with AI. Yeah.
Let's pick up on that point in education. I think it's an important point. And I think as investors, as those that are managing a portfolio of businesses that are directing them towards a successful future equity event, and seeing AI as a potential opportunity either to improve business horizons or simply keep it relevant, it's difficult to pass that message on if we're not educated ourselves. We need to eat a little bit of our own dog food. So let's turn the lens internally and to application within the fund. And Nicola, I'm going to ask you actually to give us a kind of a little bit of perspective for the audience. So I'm sure we'll be very, very keen to understand how Apeiris themselves have turned the lens on your business processes, the way that you do deals, and how you might be able to use AI to support that. If you could share some of that experience, it'd be great.
Yeah, so we are really thinking about the use cases within the sort of deal execution and value creation part of the business. And it starts with that kind of use case mentality. So people within the business working out how we might solve problems more quickly, or where we want to improve the insights that we're getting, as opposed to starting just with the sort of technology or the tools. So I think that part where, we will work with providers, but it's really the piece from investment committee, where are the opportunities, where are the risks, and using that sort of problem solving mindset to then set about the technology roadmap and what we're trying to develop. On the deal execution side, if we look to other sectors, so if we think about legal services, that's a market that I think has been disrupted, and is at the forefront in terms of adoption and what's happening. And you've seen things like Harvey AI, to being able to be trained really deeply on that sort of legal context to do contract reviews. And we're starting to see some of that within private equity, and sort of deal doing more generally. So thinking about BDRs, so data rooms, and having tools that are trained specifically on just that use case. So again, a very narrow use case, but allowing the model to be trained, and so have the context to answer sort of question Q&A back on that data set. And I'm sure we will see more of that come in the next sort of year. I think that will be a pretty quick adoption curve, because it's a sort of analogous case to what we've seen in other industries that are slightly ahead. So I think, within that deal doing and the lens of diligence and execution, there are there are models that will be trained to help and augment those processes. I think it becomes then really interesting as we think about value creation and where are the the 10x opportunities with technology. I think that will take a bit longer in terms of working through each of those sort of industry verticals and some of the use cases to really understand the value and therefore the payback on the investment.
Thank you. And Rich, just building on that, you've spent a lot of time with funds themselves and how they are applying modules like GPT to their day-to-day processes. So a bit of future gazing from you to put you on the spot, because I didn't give you this one to warm up with. So what's next, given the soon to be kind of mass adoption of the image recognition, complex data sets into the models? What do we think's next, certainly from a funds perspective, in terms of supporting the deal process?
So I think, Nicola's already spoken to some of the examples there. I think it's probably going to be a gradual creep into more and more of the deal process. At the moment, there is still a trust issue, as there absolutely should be, because hallucinations are still not well understood in terms of these large language models and generative AI. So as people gain confidence and trust in them, they'll become more and more integrated. I know of one firm that has given their GPT a vote on the investment committee, and it uses all the deal papers and the IC note and previous decisions to make that vote.
Wow.
Now, I don't know how that vote is weighted, whether it's, but yeah, apparently that is happening out there in the wild now. I guess if you take it to its ultimate conclusion, you will have an entirely algorithmic deal origination, selection, and investment process where the humans are there really to build rapport. They're there to build rapport and provide a layer of safety over the decision making. But ultimately, all the data and procedural decisions would be made by an AI investment.
So it was fun while it lasted. No.
But rapport and human emotion, whilst we still have control of these technologies, will still be very important. So PE is all about often rapport, isn't it, with management boards and.
We were talking about that earlier. Let's just disappear off down that thread for a little bit. I think that's pretty relevant. Helen, from your perspective then, so all of our jobs will be obsolete. The votes will be cast for us and the research will be done. Where then is the opportunity to differentiate potentially? If this is a mass adoption across an industry, where do you think the opportunity then still sits for us to do things differently?
My father had to use those books of sine, cos, tan tabulations. I had to learn how to use those funky calculators. Then Excel came along. You get the point I'm about to make, don't you? None of that has replaced curiosity and invention. They've made us faster, better, more accurate, but the ability to see around corners and conceptualize a problem nobody knew existed is the powerful, for me, optimistic view of the human race. My grandfather told me that photography wouldn't exist by the time I was this age because the world was running out of silver nitrate. So there's a history of technology innovation which says the generation in which the technology is born will use it for fairly prosaic, mundane, obvious purposes. And in 25 years' time, the generation that has grown up and through it will have invented completely new business models. So it's almost impossible for Rich and I to sort of talk about where this capability is going. But I have complete faith in the human condition, if you like. So the other ad I would have is I'm sure some of you have heard this phrase, the tyranny of mathematics. Because mathematics is accurate, it must somehow be pure. Well, it's not. This whole field of algorithmic decisioning is riddled with human bias. Again, I'm stating the obvious, I apologize. The counsel I want to give you all is to think about these decisioning capabilities as incredibly junior employees. Compare yourselves now to yourselves when you were 21. You just graduated. Look at the skills and experience you've accreted now, the judgment calls you make with more nuance now than you did when you were 20 or 21. Algorithms need to be managed like employees or like management boards. They need to be monitored and trained and developed to serve your purposes. And I think we are a fair way off algorithms being able to train and coach other algorithms.
I disagree with Helen finally.
Of course, yes. Here we go. This is what you came for.
I just point to one interesting research article recently came out by, I think it was Boston Consulting Group, where they took a bunch of management consultants, and one sample had access to the latest GPT technologies, the other didn't. And okay, surprise, surprise, the consultants that had access to the GPT technologies did stuff quicker and to a higher level. But the actual interesting insight was the biggest change was in the junior employees or the less skilled management consultants. They were brought up to the same level as the better consultants. So there's been a lot of conversation around, well, you know, does this mean the end of research, junior research roles in firms or companies? Well, actually, does it mean the end of, you know, mid-level roles where you can have a junior person, augment them with these technologies, and then they're doing the work of someone in their 30s, 40s. I think that's a really interesting perspective, and might cause us to rethink the impact, of some of these technologies. And I think we'll get there quicker in certain industries than we probably think, knowledge workers specifically.
JP?
I was just going to add that there are instances where AI tools already have less bias than humans, who are not without bias, obviously. There was a BBC News item a few weeks ago about AI delivered talking therapies where for people with mental health issues, which found that actually AI delivered therapies had less bias than going to see a human being who comes with their own inbuilt issues. So that's a really interesting example of how these things can work either way, because Helen's absolutely right as well. I think the other thing, I just wanted to pick up on something that Nicola said. We have the fantastic advantage that we get to use Palladium's latest and greatest thinking and tools when we're doing our acquisitions. So we are using all of the amazing things that it's now capable of, and all the things that it will be capable of. But organizations that we find still have a choice about who they're going to be bought by. And ultimately, it's a cultural choice we find at the same price point. People want to work with other people that they're going to enjoy working with. So one of the things that I think is going to happen is that the impact of AI is going to make the cultural element of acquisition so much more important, because everyone's going to have the same tools. So there's going to be a huge averaging effect of AI, that everyone's got a superpower in their pocket. So it's all about the people. Duh.
Now, before we get to questions, which is coming very, very shortly, I'm staying with you there, JP, for a second. I'd like to understand from your perspective how AI maturity or awareness is playing into your decision making in respect of the acquisitions that Next 15 are going to make, and then obviously onto you, Nicola, as well. So how is that playing a role? How has that come into not the application of it in diligence, but more your mindset? What are you expecting to see from assets that are subsequently attractive to the group?
It's a really interesting question, and there's a whole stream of sort of AI impact diligence that we now feed into our decision-making process. We've been running it on ourselves, but Palladium and others in the group have created this AI impact assessment process that they're using with clients as well, which is about breaking down businesses into the value chain of what they do and working out how it's going to be impacted by AI for good or ill, because it's quite hard to take a whole business and say, well, how will AI impact it? But once you break it down into what it does, it becomes a bit easier. So that's the first thing. And we look now at potential acquisitions, and we go through that process and we think, will this business be a good business in 3-4 years' time? What is the market for that going to look like, especially when you take pricing into account, which is something we haven't talked about. I think there's a huge thing here about what people value and what they will be willing to pay for, because a lot of businesses charge based on time today. And if the amount of time that goes into a task is going to go down, if you don't have alternatives, that is going to be a huge problem for your business model. So one of the things that we have been doing across our group is we've run a process this autumn of asking every business to come back and tell us what business they think they're in. Sounds like a strange question, but if you'd have asked Kodak what business they were in, they'd have probably said we're in the business of making camera film, and actually they were probably in the business of capturing memories. But that framing of what you think you do is incredibly important, and if you start from the right place, then it means you're solving customers' problems, and how you solve that problem may well change profoundly in an AI-driven world. But the customer's problem remains, and it will still be valuable to solve. And making sure that you're solving that problem is the key to being able to price that problem. So that's one of the things we look for: businesses that really have a good handle on the problem that they solve for customers, and that they've understood how that is going to evolve in an AI-driven era.
And Nicola, then, from your perspective, AI consideration in diligence now, part of the something that you insist needs to be there before you invest. How's it played into your investment strategies?
Just before I answer that, I was going to just come back on, we're sort of talking about AI and how it, I think, can help us make better decisions, and we sort of talked about productivity, value creation. The panel isn't called AI, how does it help you win a deal? And I think some of that is because there is the human element, both the sort of looking around corners and imagining what the future looks like in a different way, and sort of both for businesses and for teams, and also building that relationship with companies. And it's ultimately, at the moment anyway, people who get to decide who they work with. So I think there is, I probably sit more on that side of the fence in terms of the importance around humans and, and how we interpret and build relationships, as much as the sort of technology and the icy vote with a GPT model. But linking back to investment committee, obviously the impact of AI and technology is an important part of diligence, both from a sector perspective, but also from the individual company, and there'll be winners and losers in all of those markets. You look at excuse me, healthcare, sector I cover and follow, and there's been some amazing leaps forward in terms of drug discovery, pharmaceuticals using AI in some pretty impressive and novel ways. And of course, those businesses that get it right will have both the first mover advantage and also a valuation impact and uplift through harnessing that technology in the right way. There'll also be, issues from investment committee as we start to see the technology more adopted around IP and IP ownership. If models are creating the product, who owns that IP, and how does that play forward, not just from a financial perspective, but from a reputational one too. So I think there is a sort of technology and what it does to the business, but also a sort of AI and what that means more broadly in the business model that we'll start to need to think about, pretty seriously.
Thank you, Nicola. Now, unfortunately, we're getting towards the close, and I want to leave plenty of time for questions. There's so much more I would love to ask you, but what I'll do is that really awkward last kind of point wrap up for you all, just to share with the audience. So I'll keep that question rather open-ended. In fact, there's something on the Slido that I can use here, a question that's come through. So your advice to investment funds starting out on their AI journey? Clearly, many here to learn today a little bit more about some of the practices that are being deployed, what that means for portcos, but also what it means for the funds themselves. And so I'd ask you all, if you were to give a little bit of advice to funds starting out on their journey, where is it you would focus energy and attention? Where would you start? And we'll start with you, Rich, and we'll work our way across.
Well, let's split that question into two. So for the fund or the firm, and then the portfolio company. So for the fund or the firm, lean in, get a basic, safe and private generative AI solution in the business and get people starting to use it. But to my earlier point as well, wrap some education around it. Don't just give people this tool and then let them form their own opinion. Provide some guidance on prompt engineering and best practices, and then see how people start to use it in their day jobs. That's the first step within a fund or a firm. Then you can start moving forward with more formal automation of different flows. For the portfolio company, I think there it's imperative that you take a targeted approach, that you do some type of AI impact assessment where you look at where the threats and opportunities are, and then you grade them accordingly, because it's very easy to spend a lot of money very quickly and achieve very little in this space. So it's really important that you take a targeted approach. And I would say look at those businesses that have a substantial knowledge worker component to them to begin with.
Thank you, Rich. Please, Nicola.
So when I first started looking at sort of implementing AI within Pyrus, we were at the sort of GPT-3 stage where the model could probably read about 10 pages, a sort of short teaser or something, and interpret that. And we now have, whether it's Anthropic and Claude, whether it's, the new GPT-4 turbo models that are, capable of much, much more. And we're about to harness, sort of picture imaging. And so that's within a sort of period of, less than a year. And so I would say this whole area is moving extremely quickly. And therefore, you have to think about the extent to which you buy in versus, make something bespoke and therefore can keep pace with that technology change, because the use cases that perhaps frustrate or don't work today, I would say, will work next year, but it may be they work next week in this environment. So continuing to keep an open mind, to iterate, to use the ideas within the organization and educate is really important. I'd also say most organizations and team members are probably using a GPT model in some form. And so from a second point would be around governance and being really clear that the sort of privacy element is critical in our businesses and our industries. And so ensuring that if people are using models, there are the correct safeguards around that. It's a private instance. If you're putting, sort of data and feeding those, large language models, so that's done in a responsible way. And I think that then goes to my final point, and we've talked less about it, but the people in this room who will be sitting on the portfolio company boards and will be therefore implementing this technology have a responsibility around the ethics and the governance of that, and to be educated and to be sort of thinking about the ramifications, not just within the sort of their organization, but more broadly, to make sure that we've talked about biases, and that's I think well understood within the models, but privacy, transparency, IP, all of those considerations are also at the forefront as we start to see that adoption curve really ramp.
Thank you. And Helen.
Show of hands, who here is personally playing with this capability? Yeah. So I think it has to start with each of us, doesn't it? And our own curiosity and our own experimentation. In a firm context, I would not underestimate the extent to which you each have phenomenal data assets. So if you think of the training assets that you have at your disposal by virtue of the history of everything you've done, who is on top of that, who is starting to do something with that, to Rich and Nicola's point. And then in terms of the portfolio companies that you're looking at supporting, do they have quality proprietary data assets like you do as a firm, or the big legal examples that have been used? Because if I look at some of the consumer businesses that I have supported, we have not failed for lack of technology investment, capability, ingenuity. It is the data has not existed in a way that is suitable for the endeavour that we're conceptualising.
So the terrible thing about going last is that everybody else has stolen all
Of course.
all your points. I suppose the first thing I would say is, I think as leaders, as the people who are looking after portfolios, we have to model the behaviours we want. It's no good just telling people to be efficient or innovate with this stuff if we're not doing it ourselves. I think we need to be going faster and better than the portfolio companies in order to be taken seriously. I think the second point I'd make is that there is a big difference between efficiency and effectiveness, which I think is a lot of what's happening today, and innovation. I think everybody understands how to use GPT to summarize things and make things fast or do things slightly better. To Helen's point, it is much, much harder to imagine how you would do things entirely differently, how you would break today's models in the way that Uber broke taxis or Airbnb broke holiday accommodation. But that is going to happen. Somebody is going to do that. And I suppose if I'm holding portfolio companies, I want my businesses to be doing it, and I don't want somebody else to be doing it to me. And then, I mean, I couldn't agree more with Helen on data. And it's interesting that not only, I mean, somebody said to me that AI sort of is a little bit like fracking. It gives you the ability to get at data which previously wasn't economically, was there, but wasn't economically available. And AI allows you to get at organizational information in a new way, and that is the only moat. The models are available to everybody or open source. The only moat that you have is not only data, but data that is definitively you or your portfolio company's data. So I think making sure that you've got that, or could have that, or license it, or buy the assets that have got that is incredibly important. Think also about where that data exists. So we have, you may have seen lying around in reception, there's a book that one of our leaders has written called The Unicorn Within, which describes a methodology for corporate innovation. It has just made it onto Harvard Business Review's all-time business book impact list, available at all good bookstores. But it defines a groundbreaking methodology for doing stuff. It's fantastic marketing. I wouldn't have published it if it had come this year, because that is unique IP. You would be selling this year. I think you should be selling a model on which that data is based. But I think the days of businesses selling access to their data should be coming to an end. And businesses that are doing that should now be thinking about selling access to the model that uses the data. But you never get, as a customer, you never get to have access to that data. And that's quite a profound shift. And it applies to some of our businesses as well. Anyway.
Thank you. So we do have some time left for questions before I bring this to a close. So I will throw that open to the audience. And for any of the Palladium team out there in the audience, keep your eyes peeled for hands going up. Anyone, please.
Feel AI is how many of them are going to be replaced by AI?
Nicola, just.
Well, I'll take a swing at that. I don't think any of our portcos are going to be replaced by AI, but all of our portcos will need to think. It's back to what value do you bring? What business are you really in? All of our portcos solve business problems which we don't see going away, but the ways in which we might solve those problems will change.
And I think the only other bit I'd clearly echo the sentiment around the portfolio, but I think some of the business models will inevitably evolve, and we talked a little bit about data and access to the model. I think businesses that have been historically time and materials based, you'll start to see more shift towards outcomes and owning that. And so as ever, there's sort of the evolution in terms of how you monetize and what your core capabilities are, I think, will change within professional services, and how that's sort of charged and ultimately how you deliver value to customers. So those that continue to keep their customer front of mind, whether it's B2B or B2C, I think will still thrive in this environment.
Thank you. So I've got one at the back there.
Big clouds in the future really have to build some AI.
I'm going to say I don't think I've seen a wowzer opportunity. Those things are very much on our mind, and we have a labs unit which is specifically designed to explore the frontiers for those sorts of things. But I don't think we have seen those things already. I think we have ideas about where those might be, and we're exploring those.
Yeah, I think the original adoption, perhaps because it is easier to conceptualize, has been on the productivity side of things. Whether that's around that sort of acquisition identifier I was talking about earlier, or indeed the workflows. I think as we start to think, particularly in the consumer facing businesses, those the customer journeys that will be intercepted by sort of personal AI, and that again has a big impact in terms of both switch but capturing new and making sure that as we evolve into that world, we have the right systems and processes behind the scenes to then enable that shift to happen. So I think again it's a planning thing where we're sort of looking down the road. I suspect the road is shorter than we think, and it will be here quicker, but it's not yesterday.
We're going to make time for two more questions. I've got one right here.
Question about what you think about AI in the public sector. Public sector is struggling with basic cloud transformation. Prospects for that are, particularly given also the wider social issue that you have an increasing gap between what the private sector is doing to self-serve and friendliness, the public sector that's lagging.
I wrote the government's digital strategy a few years ago, and part of that was how you bring these technologies to bear on public services. But taking the point that Nicola made earlier, that not everybody is digitally savvy and can use these services. But there is a huge push across government, and we do a lot of work for government in Next 15. There's a huge push to get AI built into these services, because you can make transformational changes in the way that you serve citizens. And in fact, we have been doing a lot of that with machine learning, the sort of previous wave, for some years. So I expect it to be equally as big as anything that we'll see in the commercial sector.
Any further points on that? Okay.
Yeah, I would just say that it starts with data. And I know there's been great strides within government, with their open data initiatives. You can't do anything truly transformational with AI unless you've got your data in a sound place. And that is the prerequisite for any of the ambitious things that we've spoken about. So, in a way, I think, if government is continuing to focus on getting their data integrated and exposed in a sensible way, then they will be in a good position to exploit the technologies. But yeah, it does rely on having the data.
Thanks. So last question, there was one just there. Yeah, we're going to take that and then I'm going to bring it to a close. So thank you.
That's close. Take that. Right, close. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great question. So first of all, I'd start by saying it differs by each firm that we've worked with. They've all got different perspectives on how fast and how far they want to go. But it starts with as we've said before, a private and safe access to the latest models. So in our case, it's GPT-4 Turbo, 128K. So a really big context window, which means a big working memory that you can put big documents in. So, you can put an IC note into the AI's working memory plus the vendor diligences, and then do some interesting summarization and work around that. So we land this basic workforce tool, which is private and safe, gives everyone access to the models. We then build tasks so that everybody in the firm, no matter their level of understanding or sophistication in prompt engineering, has access to a common set of workflows. They can then activate those workflows within our tool's called Prism, but others are available, that allow you to do things like identify bolt-on opportunities, run virtual subject matter expert panels, identify particular opportunities for market impact. So you run those tasks, they go off to the AI, and then you respond with hopefully something useful. I think where we see the biggest step changes in capabilities when people start to integrate their own data, and I think as someone's mentioned it, when you can start to give the AI access to your private corporate knowledge store, that's when, some of the really interesting use cases open up. So it has access to all your previous IC papers, and it can pull on that information when it's responding. So the AI then becomes grounded in your firm's private knowledge. And that's the first step of training. And we haven't used any GPUs at this point. We haven't gone and created our own model. This is simply layering private data on top of an off-the-shelf foundation model. The final step that you get to, and firms are starting to get there, some quicker than others, is where you are taking that training, where you are training them on and creating your own model to then, respond in a specific way, or, try and do things in an optimized fashion. There aren't many firms who are there at that level yet. Most are just at the stage of starting to connect their private document stores.
Thank you. Rich, thank you. So I'm conscious that we're a little bit over time. Firstly, I'd like to thank you all for attending and for your questions. And I assume with your closed source question, that was the one that was sitting there on Slido. So now I don't feel guilty that we didn't get to that one. So that's very good. A very rapid conclusion from me, and some wonderful sound bites like AI is the new fracking. I like that. I'll take that one away with us. But clearly, opportunity abound. But it starts with us. It starts with us educating ourselves, experimenting, a freedom to fail, but doing it in a secure and a private environment, and keeping our eyes open to the opportunities, but understanding where some of those limitations might lie. There's a long way to go, I think, before we see that mass adoption, but boy, is it going quickly. So great that you were here today. Great to get your questions. I'll finish by saying, let's please give a round of applause. Thank you very much to Rich, to Nicola, to Helen, and to JP for their inputs. This whole session was recorded, and for those that have joined us all around the world, and generally some people have logged on very early in the morning for this. Yeah, you're up there somewhere. Thank you for joining us. The whole session was recorded. We will be distributing that to everybody that was here today. Please do feel free to send that around. And if you have any further questions you want to follow up on, here is your panel. So once again, thank you very much.